All right, welcome back to another episode of Life Between the Sticks with Cody Cropper. As always, your host, Brandon, and we are back post-World Cup.
Post-World Cup.
You went away
I did.
for the week after Christmas, which is good, visiting family. I did the same, albeit less warm than you in California. I only went to Iowa.
Yes, California. I mean, it was a little rainy, but better than Minnesota.
Bro, it got bad here for a while, as you know, definitely during the crazy storm. But we're back just in time for not only the MLS preseason to be kicking off, which is the earliest that preseason has ever kicked off. We've got the drama with U.S. soccer, so a lot of different things to touch on between Berhalter's, Reyna's, now the Pepe comments about his reaction to not getting called up. So we're going to touch on a lot of that, but before we do, you have another product from Motivate. It's the supplement brand you use as a professional athlete and trust, and timely product this time.
It is a new year, new me product. It is Motivate Detox. It helps you beat the bloat. It provides digestive support, and not only do I like it, my wife likes it, and anybody in our family that has also tried it, any of my friends and family that have tried it really like it as well. So I suggest that you start your new year off right.
Yeah.
And get some Motivate Detox.
Yeah, that post-holiday diet, right? It's going to be really important. I think a lot of us made some concessions that we don't normally. So you got a code?
Yes, it is Cody 15.
All right, it'll be in the description.
Proper 15.
We got a link and the code in the description.
Link and code in the description.
Don't worry about it. All right, so first off, let's talk about the wild allegations surrounding the Berhalter versus Reyna family dispute. So kind of set the stage for everyone out here. Berhalter's contract expired, I believe, December 31st.
I believe you're right.
January 1st, he's technically not employed by U.S. Soccer. So there was a lot of question of, is he going to sign? Does he want to go to club football? That very quickly became irrelevant because all of a sudden the media blasted everybody and said, hey, guess what? There's an unnamed family in the squad that is threatening to blackmail Gregg Berhalter if U.S. Soccer doesn't can him, which was a crazy allegation to be made. You assume they had some sources. So then the next thing that happens is Berhalter comes out and uses his Twitter account, which he never does. It's to the point where no one even knew if it wasn't verified. Was it really him? So then you're like, okay, well, this is weird. Then U.S. Soccer puts out a statement, says, hey, we've been made aware of a potential domestic abuse violation. U.S. Soccer, we take this serious. They've had all of the horrific issues with the NAWSL or the NWSL. They've had a lot of issues with different things in that sense. So it's like, okay, we got to look at this. Their comments were their press release was very murky and left a lot of doors open. I think it hurt more than it helped at the time.
Yes.
And then they said, we'll have a new coach in line for the January camp. Berhalter's not going to be there. Well, obviously, he hasn't signed a contract.
So he's definitely not going to be there.
So at this day, the media is on fire. Everybody is making their opinions known. Essentially, it's pretty obvious that Reyna, Gio, had issues with Berhalter. Berhalter used Gio's issue within camp to promote how good of a leader he is at this leadership conference post-World Cup. Gio had to come out and make a statement. Was like, my bad, man. I apologize. You asked me. I did. I thought we handled it behind closed doors.
That was also the agreement, was it not? That it would be
Allegedly
handled and kept behind closed doors and wouldn't go into the media.
So obviously there's friction between Gio Reyna and Gregg Berhalter.
Yes.
Then you kind of peel layers back. So the Berhalters and Reyna families have known each other for a long time.
Very long time.
So Berhalter had to air his dirty laundry when he was 19, back in the early 90s. He was at UNC Chapel Hill. Yeah. His girlfriend, now wife, was roommates with Claudio Reyna's now wife. So she witnessed this issue and a potential pattern of bad behavior, and she's been there from the beginning, right? So then all of a sudden you connect the dots, and you're like, well, Claudio Reyna's wife, a.k.a. Gio's mom, went to school with Berhalter and his now wife. It was pretty obvious to how to connect the dots. And so Lala, Stu Holden, Twellman, every soccer head out there condemned and blasted the Reyna family. And other people, I think it was more fans than anyone really official, was like Claudio Reyna should be kicked out of Austin FC. Like Gio should never play again. Like this is disgraceful that you would blackmail. Well, for those of us that were patient and waited today, Danielle Reyna came out and gave her side of the story, which to me, and this is just my opinion, is far more believable. That again, she called Earnie Stewart. You go about this little family of like soccer people that grew up together. He's right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And she said, nope, I called Earnie. I just asked him to speak with Gregg to make sure he doesn't drag Gio's name through the mud anymore. He's a kid. He's struggling with all this heat he's getting. You know, Gregg made a mistake as a 19-year-old. We all know it. Like, Gregg should know more than anybody that, like, this is a tough time for kids. That then, because Ernie's an employee of U.S. Soccer, triggered an automatic investigation, and that's what blew up. But I don't think Danielle at any point was really trying to blackmail. So this is a mess. It's an absolute disaster post a semi-successful World Cup.
Agreed.
What do you make of all this?
It's a never-ending circle of it just seems like a never-ending circle of drama. I think, like you said, I don't think Danielle Reyna ever meant for it to be perceived as blackmail. I think the situation that occurred during the World Cup was dealt with and was meant to be kept behind closed doors. It was not. Gio Reyna apologized, and now it's kind of just blown out of proportion as things have escalated and as time has gone on. And I think he recognized his mistake, his issue in kind of pulling his foot off of the pedal during the World Cup after being told, Gio, after being told that he would not be a starter or play significant minutes. I think he recognized that moment or that issue and apologized for it and began to deal with it and regrets it. And I don't think that it's something that needed to come to what it did, needed to come to this.
Yeah, well, for sure, you know. And look, this isn't the first time he's had to deal with a disciplinary issue. Weston McKennie got kicked out of camp for undisclosed reasons.
Yes.
So, like, that was handled behind closed doors.
It was.
That was handled outside the public. And I tell you,
and it was kept. And it's been kept there.
We all wanted to know what
did.
Weston did. The allegations and the guessing, it was scandalous. But Weston was able to be reintegrated. Correct. He was punished. He had to leave. He potentially hurt the chances for qualifying. It was not wrapped up at that point. But that was handled cleanly. It's just weird that this has not. And I'm not blaming Gregg. I don't think anyone should have their dirty laundry aired from when they were 19, especially when clearly him and his wife have figured out how to move past it.
Correct. I mean, they've been quite successful since then. They have 4 children. I mean, they have found a way to move past it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that something that happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago,
probably
needed to be aired.
Right.
I think that everybody makes mistakes when they're young. I certainly made my fair share as a player, as a person, but you grow and you learn from them. And I think that Gregg has grown and learned from his mistake. I think Weston grew and learned from his mistake. And I believe that Gio has probably learned from his mistake.
Well, I don't think that Gio and Gregg are ever going to be on the same sideline ever.
I don't think so either. I think that this is...
It's gotten gross.
Yeah, it has. It's become very negative. It's impacted U.S. soccer in ways that I don't think people realize that it has yet. It's probably set U.S. soccer back a couple years, unfortunately, with the development of the organization, because you don't see this happening to England. You don't see this happening to Brazil. You don't see, and they continue to grow. We have all these dramatic experiences in the U.S., because of where our society is today, these things have to be dealt with. And unfortunately, I think that because of that right now, this has set U.S. soccer back.
Yeah. So kind of the way I break it down is in a sick, twisted way, Gregg kind of brought this on himself by using Gio as an example in a public forum to promote his amazing leadership ability, which, by the way, I think it backfired because if you read it, he said that he wanted to send this player home, but the team voted, and I think by one vote kept him. So if anything, that just says that like you acquiesced to the team, even though you wanted him gone. So I don't even know how much he really won off of that.
No, I agree. And for me, living in the United States, I am a big fan of football. And here in Minnesota, there was I don't want to call it a similar situation, but with the University of Minnesota football, they had a scandal that happened, and PJ Fleck, being a very good leader, dealt with that situation, kept what he could behind closed doors, and dealt with it in a way that you look at Minnesota, their football program has since then grown.
Yeah.
It has, seen steady increases. They dealt with it. And I just don't see the same kind of mitigation from U.S. Soccer and Gregg Berhalter. And that's not anything against Gregg or U.S. Soccer. I'm just saying the comparisons are very different for somebody who follows, the Golden Gophers and U.S. Soccer. Just
probably a small overlap, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to strong leadership. Right. And again,
exactly.
If Gregg never would have used it to build his own profile post-World Cup, this wouldn't be out in the public. Gregg put it in the public.
Correct.
What happened? A concerned mom, which, again, call it a helicopter parent, whatever you want. A lot of people are saying it's classic U.S. soccer. Like, I think people forget how close-knit. Like, Men in Blazers put it out there. Like, Gregg and Claudio played in the national team together. Like, they were, I think, like, at Gio's birth. Like, these families were so close. And when you throw Ernie Stewart in there, they all played in the national team at the same time. Like, they're a part of this Good Old Boys network, which we'll talk about. And so, she's calling up a family friend to say, like, Gio's struggling. Like, I'm asking you to make sure Gregg doesn't flame him out in the media anymore. And I do think, though, that goes back to poor leadership tactics on his side.
Yeah.
Now, what I do think sucks for Gregg and his wife and now this whole situation is I would have wished that Ernie would have used a little bit of discretion and kept it under the rug and behind closed doors. Instead, and I know like this is very much a gray area, it's now he is a mandatory reporter about domestic abuse, but it didn't happen. It wasn't related to U.S. Soccer, but it's technically not even an employee anymore. But at the time it was, because this was mid-December.
Yes.
It was an automatic investigation.
Yeah.
But again, like if they just would have handled that internally, but because of the scandals and the other things that U.S. Soccer, USSF has gone through, they have to be proactive in communication, and they have to say, no, we heard about this, we're investigating it. It might come to nothing, but we're on it, so we don't get in trouble for negligence or turning the other way. But like this just didn't seem like it. No. And so now I do feel bad that this is blown up, but it did all stem from Gregg's public comments. But then what we'll transition to in a little bit is this weird Good Old Boys network that does exist in U.S. Soccer.
Yeah, and my biggest thing is I don't think people realize how much or who this is going to impact the most. And I think that it's going to, personally, I think this whole situation being blown out of proportion, yes, it hurts U.S. Soccer. Yes, it hurts Gregg Berhalter. Yes, it hurts Claudio Reyna. But more importantly, I think it hurts Gio Reyna. Mm-hmm. And this is dirty laundry being aired that does not need to be aired, that could impact a very talented young player's career.
Yeah.
And for U.S. Soccer, that is very detrimental to the future of the organization and their ability to progress as a respected, footballing or soccer nation?
It is a tough thing, here. So what I liked is that who tweeted this? Let me pull this up real quick. So I just lost it. So this is in response. So U.S. men's national team thoughts. I think most people right here know that account. It says, so disappointed in all parties, from Berhalter's decision to limit Gio, to Gio's reaction to that news, to his parents' decision to, I'm not going to say it, but to, call Earnie about Berhalter, to Berhalter put it out publicly at a conference, to Reyna's actually then now made their side public. It's a mess. And Rob B responded and said, there's another way to look at this that's necessary. If true, any contact by Reyna was made in-house to USSF and principally to Earnie Stewart, whom all sides had known for decades. There was no public. Could it be that USSF mangled this from day one? My only response to that, though, is because of what's happened with the women's side and everything, even the equal pay and the abuse that's happened in the domestic league here, you just guys got to remember, they have to cover their backside in this. They can't be seen as being caught surprised when they potentially knew something, which has now amplified it, but it goes back to poor leadership for a long time. And this, to me, is also a sign that we're still a growing soccer nation and we don't have it figured out.
I would agree on all fronts. I would also ask one other question with the whole situation is, why did Danielle call Earnie over just directly calling Gregg to try and mitigate it? Because that could have also kept it out of
I would say that
the media and being investigated.
We don't know that she didn't.
That's true. We don't know that she didn't.
Right? But you would also assume that they probably weren't having a great time talking during the World Cup after everything that had happened.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't really know what the relationship between the Berhalters and Reynas are since he took over. I mean, that very easily could have not, separated them a little bit.
Yeah.
But, she was also calling a friend who has authority in the situation and could get something done,
For sure.
So, like I said, we don't know
point.
she didn't, but at the same time, and now where we're take this to is that they're all friends. They've known each other for decades. They've played together. They've coached together. They've been in this organization together. And Half Spaces had a really good article. So if you go to halfspaces.com, it's actually from when Berhalter was officially signed as coach. And the author there was using the term nepotism much more loosely than just family. And he was using nepotism is that in U.S. soccer, there is a very tight network of who, essentially, if you played under Bruce Arena or Bob Bradley or you coached with them, you pretty much now have your blessing to go wherever. So it's kind of like if you coach for Saban, you can probably get a head coaching job somewhere else, right?
Which, if you look at it, it's actually true. Like if you coach for Bill Belichick,
you have a head
coaching job somewhere in NCAA or in the NFL. And then you have a return job once you get fired from that job.
Because they're the number one and number two most successful coaches in soccer history in America. And so what this kind of shows is how tightly wound this web is, and that pretty much the guys from the late 90s, early 2000s are now in that middle-aged tier where they've been doing administrative duties and things for 20 years. So they're seen as experienced enough to take on these roles.
Yes.
It's all a bit shocking. It was a good quote in that article. They said, look, if the CCO or the COO hired their brother to be the head coach of the Trinidad and Tobago team, we would all probably look at it with a different lens than we did in America. In America, we just kind of accepted it. And there was a lot of concerns about Berhalter being a 500 coach in the MLS, all of a sudden getting a jump up to being the U.S. men's national team coach. Now, he's gone to, I think it was Finland, and he's been to Europe. He did his time and learned, and I'm sure he presented well. Jimmy Conrad put out a video, and he said, he didn't get along with Gregg. He said Gregg was a bit of a dick on the field, but he said he was always he knew exactly how he wanted the game to be played. And he was good at communicating it, which is a good version of a coach.
Absolutely. And I can back that up with word from players that have played for him in terms of that. Like they have all said that he has known what he wants from day one, and he communicates it very well, which is why he was so successful as a coach. And I think one of the reasons why he was able, he was a front runner for the U.S. job.
Yeah. So at the time, where I think this is interesting, you texted it to me somewhere. Oh no, you sent it on Instagram. It's hard to follow Cody. He's on all these different social media platforms. So you sent this, and again, this is from USMNT only, except on Instagram. It says, per The Athletic, multiple sources said U.S. Soccer has in recent years shown an interest in Manchester City coach Pep Guardiola. Other coaches mentioned in the article to be considered have been Jesse Marsch, Zinedine Zidane, Roberto Martinez, Marcelo Bielsa, and Luis Enrique. Which I think is interesting because when you take the fact that allegedly we looked at these super sexy European coaches, a fun tweet from Simon Evans says, Jurgen Klinsmann is the only U.S. men's national team coach in the last 25 years not to have been from New Jersey or New York.
Fascinating.
Like,
Old boys club.
25 years.
25 years. That
now,
is,
how long was Klinsmann here? 2 cycles?
think so.
So maybe like
yes.
8-9 of those years was taken up by one person.
Yeah, roughly. I don't think he wasn't here 8 years. He was here for the 2014 World Cup and qualifying into that World Cup.
Gotcha. Because
we didn't make 2018, but he got fired before
because Bruce came in,
and Bruce was the head coach that did not qualify.
Yes. On that soggy pitch.
Yeah, not saying it was Bruce's fault. I'm just saying he was in charge at the time. Yeah, but he was hired in a position that was
not great.
Not great. Yeah, he was put into a very difficult situation.
So again, New York, New Jersey, DC is the other big one, and then obviously LA. But no one has ever been a head coach or an assistant coach west of Salt Lake City. So it's just an interesting fact that, like, if you're not from the northeast of the United States, you're not really getting a look right now. Yeah. So that's funny to see these European names because who do they go with at the end of the day? Who you know. And you know how this works. You saw it firsthand with Brad Friedel coming into the Revs.
Yeah, I did. And, I was told that one of the main reasons, not that Brad Friedel didn't meet the criteria for the job. It was, there was a fact of he and Mike Burns, the GM at the time, were U.S. national team teammates and I believe even roommates. And I'm not saying it's nepotism. I'm just saying that it's such a small world.
Yeah.
That Mike Burns is the general manager, an ex-teammate, an ex-potential roommate, gets the head coaching job at the Revs over what I could only assume were a handful of other,
candidates, options.
Yeah, however you want to say it. And at the time, I believe Bruce Arena was also a candidate when Mike and the Crafts hired Brad Friedel, and then less than 18 months later, Bruce got the job anyways.
Guess who?
And he was not only general manager, but he was also the head coach. So,
yeah. So to your point, right? It's again, not that anyone's unqualified. It's just there's a sense of familiarity. I think what we're seeing. So
comfort.
Look, I haven't been in the system. This might shock everybody that I was not in the youth national team system. I've not played for the national team. But what I have from an experience of being an operator, an administrator, running soccer clubs, having played in soccer clubs, coached in soccer clubs, and now getting all the way out of it and just looking at the business side is like I live my day-to-day life in the business world and I reflect on how it looks in MLS and U.S. soccer. I find it fascinating. But I've seen it in my life too where there is a good old boys network. It does happen in these situations. So I think as fans, we just need to buckle up and say, hey, probably for another 10 years, this core group of guys from like the 98 to the 02 World Cup are probably going to be ever present in everything they do. And they are going to continue to get job opportunity after job opportunity because their buddies are the ones that are the GMs and in charge at U.S. Soccer and these different things. And part of those people got those roles because of their relationships with these managers and coaches and things. So it'll be interesting to see who in MLS gets brave and goes and hires, foreign coaches, outside coaches, tries to do something different.
Yeah.
We're starting to see it a little bit, but I don't really know where U.S. Soccer goes with this. Because I bet Berhalter was going to get an extension. I bet
I would have put my house on it that
if he wanted it,
extension.
If he wanted it, he could have had it. Now you don't really know.
No, you don't, because this has created such a situation that they might just say, "Look, we're going to move on."
It's easier. It's easier to live without this pressure.
Yes, exactly. I would agree with that. I would also, bringing it back to U.S. Soccer having met with Pep Guardiola, with Zinedine Zidane, or
Sure.
I would love to know to what degree.
That's what I said.
To what degree did they meet with these names?
Well, they just
did they sit down with a representative?
No, they slid in the DMs and never heard back.
Right. Did they have full-on conversations with Pep Guardiola about coming in as the U.S. men's national team coach? Marco Bielsa?
So my understanding is there's kind of 3 levels to this, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, right? So when a national team, they want to talk to somebody who's connected to their agent, because you don't go right to the direct. Usually there's like an intermediary, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, I know this person who knows this person who knows Pep. We'll use that as an example.
Sure.
So you're going to ask your buddy to talk to his buddy and just see if there's any interest. Be like, hey, hypothetically, let's go out for a nice little seafood lunch, right? Hypothetically, let's throw this out there. How about you run back to Europe and you send me a little WhatsApp?
Yeah.
Okay, you get a positive note. So you're like, all right, well, let's go ahead and engage with the agent now, something a little bit more formal, because U.S. Soccer will have to go back and say, okay, what would this look like? If Zinedine Zidane comes in, like, how would we structure all of this? Because when Jurgen came in, he was head of U.S. Soccer development.
Yes,
he was in charge of the youth structure, and it was a disaster. So I don't think the U.S. wants to do that again. So then you can get to the point, or did they get all the way to the point where agent, manager, and U.S. Soccer are all sitting in some obscure 5-star hotel in Switzerland having an off-the-record discussion?
Right.
So to your point, do we get to step 1, step 2, or a sit-down step 3? I would be very interested.
Very interested to know, especially with not just, say, Pep, but with all the other names on that short list. The only one on there that I could actually see having gotten to maybe step 3 is Jesse Marsh.
You didn't have to go far to get to him.
Right, because he's an American. All you had to do is maybe fly to, New York when he was the Red Bulls coach, or...
That's where U.S. Soccer is headquartered. So are they in Chicago?
They're in Chicago.
They have offices in New York.
But they have offices
easy.
in New York. So maybe they didn't even have to go to an obscure 5-star hotel. They just brought him into the headquarters there.
And who's bringing Marcelo Bielsa in? That guy needs 1,000,000 hours of on-the-pitch training with those guys. Everyone knows that. The one thing you don't get with national team players is 1,000 hours
is enough
team.
Time. Yeah.
So I think that was a little
Marco
bit
Bielsa earlier?
Marcelo, he's Argentinian. But like Zidane,
sorry if I butchered that.
We know that he can come in and rally a group. I think Pep, he does want time. He plays in half spaces within half spaces of half spaces. He's very detailed.
Yes.
Jose Mourinho would be great if they honestly have their thing. Talk about unifying a dressing room and a siege mentality.
Yeah, well, and just the type of mentality that I think would fit U.S. Soccer of a...
Oh, yeah. Yes. Look, a lot of Chelsea American fans have talked about it, and we're like, Jose would win us the World Cup.
I think he would. Just with the talent that we have, which is very good, but it does not match that of any other top 10 footballing nation. Yes. I think Jose Mourinho could come in, could get the players to buy into a system and go very, very far in a competitive tournament.
Without a doubt. He's done well at Roma, too. Zidane has done it when he had to come in the middle of the season, I think, or he was leaving.
I think he was at Real Madrid, yeah.
Well, and then they won the Champions League when everyone's like they had no business winning.
Was that? Yeah.
He's proven that he can rally a dressing room of all stars, world class players, and do it.
Yeah.
The only problem with him is that he was so good that sometimes he struggles to connect with average players because he's like, why don't you see this? Why don't you have this skill?
Yes.
But again, I think we would be blessed. But again, I can't believe that on the 6th of January we're having this conversation. It was Gregg's to have. It's all gone up in smoke. But not only that, there's more things starting to come out. So Ricardo Pepi is one of the players who was a surprise drop off the roster. He came out, had a quote. I'll pull it up. I mean, the dude was unhappy.
Exactly the moment, I hopped on a phone call with the national team coach, and he said that I wasn't on the roster. So then I just hung up the phone on him.
Did you ask why?
No, not really. To be honest, it was just something that I was in shock. I was in shock because it took me like 5 minutes to be able to just get it in my mind. At first I thought it was like I just couldn't believe it. And then I was just talking to the coach, and then when we hung up the phone, then I just called my agent immediately, and then I called my dad, and then they thought I was playing with them. So it was something that I was shocked, to be honest. And like I said, I use every situation, and every situation like this is always going to make me hungry, and is always going to motivate me to keep working and working hard.
So, by the way, that was 5 minutes into that podcast. They dove right in to that topic.
Yeah, straight into the deep end.
So, again, with Pepi, he was told to go to a bigger league. He went to Germany. He wasn't getting minutes. They said, you need minutes. He went to Amsterdam, or I guess the Netherlands. He was getting minutes, and they said, nah, you're not playing good enough competition. Allegedly, you're out. So he feels super hard done by Gregg because he felt like he did everything he was told and then still got axed off the plane.
Yeah, and I think that's a very difficult situation to be in because as a player, you are essentially doing everything that you are asked to do to put yourself in the best position possible to make the World Cup team. And he doesn't, and he gets that phone call, is told that he isn't going to make the World Cup team, and then apparently hangs up on Gregg. I think that is a very immature response. I understand the response. However, I think that it's a moment that Ricardo will look back on and regret handling it in the way that he did. There are many situations in my playing career that I regret handling the way that I did. My, attitude, my response during the 2018 season when Brad Friedel first came into the Revs, I regret handling, certain situations during that time frame. However, I have learned from them and I've grown from them, and I think that this will also be one where we talked earlier in the show about how Gio will learn from his mistake at the World Cup. I think Ricardo Pepi will also hopefully learn from and grow from this situation.
Dude, that dude is so upset. So he's their top-rated player for FC Groningen. He's got 6 goals, 2 assists in the league. Like, they're in 12th place, so they're obviously struggling in the Eredivisie. But Ricardo Pepi is their main man. And
Absolutely.
he's 19, to your point, right? He's actually turning 20 in a couple days here. So he's still a young player. Like I said, you've got that call, hey, you're not going to the World Cup. It's a hard one to take, especially as a young player. This is just more not great news for Gregg.
No.
But so now you kind of look at it, and this is where it gets twisted a little bit, right? This is where it gets a little, if you're in U.S. soccer, if you're Earnie Stewart, right? If you're everybody there,
things just keep crawling out of the woodwork.
Well, if Gregg has now fallen out with Ricardo Pepi, potentially, that's probably a savable relationship.
For sure.
Maybe. Reyna's out. You now say 2 of our youngest, most promising players who are going to be 23 and 24 at the next World Cup in North America. Is
In their
Gregg
prime.
gonna be there? And if he is he able to get those guys in a spot where they're gonna play for him? Because U.S. Soccer has to think 4 years out, which is impossible. But they have to take these things into account.
Yeah. I completely agree. And it all goes back to is U.S. Soccer going to use what is currently coming to the forefront as an excuse to get away from Gregg?
Maybe a 2-year deal instead of a 4.
But I don't. Do you do that?
I mean, what happens
because is Gio Reyna going to be? Is he going to be able to get Gio Reyna on board for these 2 years?
Well, I suppose, right? Because
you want Gio Reyna involved. If he's one of your most young and promising players, you want him involved for these next 2 years, leading into the 2 years of qualification, leading into the next World Cup.
And there's not a lot going on national team wise in the next 2 years.
No,
so I
there
guess
isn't.
you're also thinking, well, I'll just wait you out. Like, I'm going to keep playing, but if you're only here for 2 years, I'll just wait for the 3rd year. New coach comes in, and I'm back in.
Yes.
There's all of these
Well,
alternate realities and like things that they have to play out.
Well, and it's not just with the national team, but there is, we're going to call it player power, right?
Yeah, as a Chelsea fan, I'm well aware of it.
Yes, and it's a situation that happens at many clubs where players stick out contracts because they know the reality is the statistics back it that players last longer than managers.
Easier to change one than an entire team.
Exactly. And I think we'll use Chelsea as an example for this.
Andre Villas-Boas absolutely got bullied out by Drogba, Lampard, John Terry.
Yeah, well, but there's a current player. He's playing center back. He was a Chalobah?
Trevo Chalobah?
Yeah. How many managers has he gone through? Didn't get his Premier League debut under any of these guys.
Yeah, he's on
New
loan.
manager comes. He spent 5, 6, 7 seasons on loan at various clubs.
Yeah,
Was told he wasn't good enough, but kept getting new deals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
And is
essentially
now a regular in the first team.
there was injuries in preseason 2 years ago, so he literally started the first game of the season and scored as a right center back in a back 3.
And he hadn't played.
No,
He was a
That's his-
striker or a winger.
no, he's a center back.
Oh,
but,
he
but he
was.
played midfield in France, so he's a
Okay.
versatile
Okay.
right-footed CDM center back. Can play right center back in a back 3.
But
yeah,
just
but we've seen that all over. To your point, right?
yes, it's not just a Chelsea. It's not just the U.S.
Injuries,
soccer.
Injuries, new coaches, just things happen. I mean, you played how many games last season for Vancouver?
Yeah, 2020. I think.
Okay, and like you went in thinking you probably were going to get the odd cup game or maybe here and there. Hassal, right? Gets injured, and all of a sudden you're thrown in, and you're guaranteed a run of games. Essentially, it changes your fortune. It changes your favor. I don't know. What do you think? Like, if you are a 19, 20-year-old who is on the up and up in the European stage, on the national team stage, how worried are you if you're Gio and Pepe about this saga?
I think Gio more so than Pepe is probably thinking, I hope this goes away sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
However, in the long term, I don't think either of them are really worried about it. I think they are currently preoccupied with their club season.
Thankfully.
I mean,
Gio went back right after the World Cup and scored a banger.
He did. He scored a world-class goal right after the World Cup, right after all of this kind of, imploded, came into the public eye. I think long term they're not too worried about it.
All right. Enough about the drama. We could probably go on for a lot longer, but I do want to touch on MLS preseason. And for those of you that aren't aware, the season has shifted. The schedule, this is the first year of a change in schedule. Is that right?
I wouldn't say it's the first year. I think because of, COVID, because of adding more games, teams coming into the league, the schedule continues to change. Now, when I first came into the league in 2016, my first preseason was 2017. Our start date wasn't until I think the 25th of January or the final Friday in January. And every year it has just gotten earlier and earlier and earlier. And more games have somehow found their way into the schedule. The season has either compacted or become more demanding somehow. And it's just fascinating to see how it all plays out, because January 6th is today, and I believe that was the report date for all players to return to market.
The city where their team is based.
The city where their team is based. They have entrance physicals, media day, etc. over the next 2 days, and then preseason training starts on the 9th.
Yeah, so I mean, we're at it. How many competitions do you play? So you've got the MLS League season.
Yes.
You've got potentially CONCACAF Champions League.
Correct.
You had the Canadian Cup, obviously, as a Canadian team.
And the equivalent for all U.S. teams will be the Lamar Hunt
Trophy.
Open Cup.
Yep, the U.S. Open.
Yep. And then this year they have a competition between Liga MX and MLS teams called Leagues Cup, where I believe the MLS season and the Liga MX season will stop for 1 month, and all teams will go into groups of 4.
Okay.
And be guaranteed 3 games each in
Awesome.
Essentially like a World Cup bout.
You might get 2 Mexican teams or 2 U.S. teams. Is the CPL involved, the Canadian Premier League?
No. No, I don't think so. Because that would then open the door for all USL teams.
Oh,
so
is that
no,
the,
I
is
think
that
it's
the level
just
they're at? Well,
I think it's just MLS and
Liga MX.
Liga MX. But yeah, so Vancouver this year will compete in 4 competitions. They will have CONCACAF Champions League. They will have MLS. They will have the Canadian Championship.
Cup. Yeah.
And they will have the Leagues Cup. Now, you're talking a minimum of 40 to 45 games.
I mean, the top European teams are playing 60.
Yeah, but
that's my point, though, is like we can look at rosters, level of players.
Right.
They
don't have a salary cap.
They have better travel.
They have better travel. They have better facilities. I mean, all around, you have the support to play 60 games.
Yeah.
You have squad depth. You have better travel, like we just said. You have better facilities. You have better recovery.
You don't have 8-hour flights across the country and all those things.
I mean, last year when we played New England at home, New England had a 6.5-hour flight.
Yeah, I mean,
to come and play us.
Yeah.
You don't get that in Europe. If
you're there a day and a half before, you have time to acclimate. Yeah.
With you guys, it's very demanding.
It's harder.
This is. It's not that it's a harder league to adapt to, but a lot of players that come from Europe struggle because the travel is so demanding.
Well, I mean, Steven Gerrard put his foot in his mouth with his quotes of that he had no idea essentially what he walked into in the MLS, but it highlighted the kind of pre-COVID craziness that was the league. I mean, at least you guys are getting chartered flights these days and things.
Yeah. I mean, pre-COVID, we were flying domestic airlines.
My friend is team ops at Sporting KC, and it was like, which terminal are you in? I was like going to walk into the terminal where the Sporting Kansas City team was walking out of. Like, unheard of in any other league or sport. So, all right. So, the preseason is kicking off. It's earlier and earlier and earlier now. So,
yes.
And this is the first time coming off a World Cup. There wasn't a lot of MLS guys in the World Cup.
No, I think.
But there is one world champion.
There is one world champion.
The Atlanta United guy.
Yes. Thiago Almeida?
Sure. I'm working on it this year. This year, I'm going to commit to MLS.
You're going to commit to more MLS.
Yes. Once you get signed, that'll help me.
That would help me too, yeah.
So, yeah, obviously Walker Zimmerman was a big one. Jordan Morris played.
Yeah, I think, the U.S. soccer and I'm going to say Canadian soccer.
Sure.
Why am I?
Canadian
soccer?
Yeah.
Yeah, Canadian.
Yeah,
right.
that's what
that's not
Alphonso
in my
Davies plays, the Canadian national team.
Their national teams were made up mainly MLS guys, or a majority of the MLS players that were at the World Cup were on either of those rosters.
You and I will grab a Canadian player, and we will talk about how much the MLS and Division I soccer has boosted the profile of soccer and the profile player in Canada.
Yes.
We talked about it lightly. That is a whole other episode I want to dive into, because the number of guys that are coming from Canada into Division I schools and then getting into the super draft, or getting into academies and things, it's good. I think we're all happy that you have a competitive North America. Is the fact that Canada, they were dead rubber back in the day, and it hasn't been that long.
No,
their trajectory has been fascinating. So we'll definitely talk about that. But from a preseason standpoint, a lot of teams are going to go to warm weather markets. Are they staying domestic, or do they go abroad? Is every team different?
Every team is different.
Because it depends on the owner, right?
Absolutely.
The owner gets to decide how much they loosen the purse strings and get to do things.
Yes.
There's not like a league requirement for preseason.
Not that I'm aware of. What that comes into play is who the general manager is. So like Vancouver has a German general manager, German-Austrian general manager, and they are doing their first preseason trip in Marbella, Spain.
The classic for a lot of North European teams.
Yeah, yes. However, I know their second preseason trip is in Palm Springs, which is I don't want to say it's a new tournament or a new preseason option, but I believe 10 to 12 MLS teams are doing their second preseason trip in Palm Springs. So it varies. When I was in New England, we did, under Brad Friedel, we did a preseason in Marbella, Spain. And the year before that, under Jay Heaps, we did Casa Grande, Arizona, which is no longer an option for many reasons. That, not to say that was Jay's decision, but I think it was just the purse strings at the time Jay was in charge of the team were a little bit tighter than than they were when Brad came in.
Yeah.
And even more so when Bruce came in.
Bruce, in his contract negotiations, he gets to call the shots. He's going to control a lot of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, preseason is wild to think that post-World Cup, we're now going right into the season. I think some of those guys are going to get a little bit of time off. But, Kylian Mbappe went immediately back to PSG, was in training, but then he was at the Brooklyn Nets game. So I think, is every player just different on post-tournament, how quickly they want to get back to going? How have you seen that with your teammates?
I don't think it's player dependent. I think it's club dependent and how much of a load they took during the World Cup, or Kylian Mbappe is I'm going to say a different level, because he can show up at the Brooklyn Nets game and have traveled from Paris 2 days before on a private jet. Mm-hmm. Whereas a lot of the guys in MLS can't do that.
Correct.
So I think going back to the load that players take during a specific phase of their, for MLS during their off season, I think teams will reintegrate them as they see fit, as I'm sure a lot of, European teams did. I look at
Walker's going right back in. Walker doesn't know what to do with himself.
Yeah, Walker's hungry to be right back in it.
Yeah.
But you look at some of the Premier League players. There were England players playing in the first week back of the Premier League, and guys that maybe were with Argentina.
McAllister with Brighton. He just got back. So he's now being reintegrated. And I believe he played in the last game. He came on as a late sub, and they whooped, I forgot who they played, 4-1. I mean, they were cooking. So.
Right. So it all depends on how many games they played, how many minutes they played, when they were knocked out of the tournament. There's a lot that goes into.
But much better for MLS to be preseason reintegrating rather than these European and South American
Absolutely,
teams that have to
because-
do it middle of the season.
Absolutely, because they get no rest.
Yeah.
And it's not just the fact of limited rest. It's like no time off.
And more games.
More games. Their bodies have taken such a beating because they started. Most European teams or most English teams will start preseason on January 1. July 1.
With the youth.
With 4
kinda-
weeks.
Yeah, fringe players.
Right. 4 to 5 weeks of preseason before the first game of the season.
Yeah.
Then they go from the 1st of August or August 7th to the World Cup. These guys go straight to the World Cup with a week of preparation with their country, 2 weeks of preparation at most.
Yep.
Then they get eliminated or they go all the way. They go straight back to their club team and they have another 6 months.
Yeah. Non-stop now.
Nonstop.
And in part of that, you also had 2 international breaks this fall. So depending on where you were and where your national team was playing, you were having to go all over the world.
All over the world.
It is definitely.
It's taxing and it takes its toll.
You and I will do another one. Gianni Infantino has put both feet in his mouth and wants a World Cup every 3 years now, where he wants to create a new tournament. So every single summer there will be a FIFA mandated national, or I guess global tournament. But you've definitely put a lot of good stuff out there about players getting run ragged, and we saw the horrific injury at the end of the MLS Cup. That was in extra time. Players were fatigued. They'd played an entire season. They were in overtime. Their mind is making a decision that their body can't fulfill, and Crepeau has a terrible leg break. Fatigue plays into that, and MLS
Absolutely.
needs to reckon with it. I doubt they will right now, but all we can hope for is a healthy preseason. The players get the time off. Thank God sports science is getting more and more into the MLS, with the training vest with Catapult and sports stats and things like that. I would say I think MLS has, to their credit, done a good job of wearing the vest from the beginning. A lot of
Agreed.
traditional European teams like, no, you can't wear it. There's a hard plastic thing. We're traditional. That data is now coming into it.
For sure. However, having said that, head coaches and assistant coaches need to actually listen to that information.
I've got a great follow-up on that later, because essentially medical staffs are there to advise. Coaches still make decisions.
Correct.
So, all right. Hey, we've gone long. This has been a good one. I appreciate it. We'll keep you guys updated on Real Housewives of U.S. Soccer. More to come on that one.
Wow.
The drama.
Wow, that was quite witty.
Yeah, well,
Quite
my
witty,
wife's
Brandon.
been
I like
watching it, so
Oh, yeah.
unfortunately
Sounds
it's
familiar.
a little top of mind.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
MLS preseason is about to kick off, so we'll start to, once the guys get settled, once you find your home, we'll do a little bit more about that as the season kicks off. But I'm excited. So let's get U.S. Soccer out of the way. World Cup's over. We don't need to hear anything from them for a while. I think it's wild they're having a January camp, but it's a FIFA-regulated date, so they can, I suppose.
That is true.
All right, whatever. Anyways, share it with somebody you like. Hope you enjoyed it. If you're not following us on TikTok, follow us on Instagram. Check out Motivate. Link in the description. We're out. More content coming at you guys next week. Have a great weekend.